Tuesday the 24th of November 2015. Just to remind you that this meeting will be recorded and subsequently made available to the public for listening purposes. So, Lucy, do you have any Sederunt apologies?
Good morning. We have 19 members present, and so far I have apologies from Councillor Karen Crothers, Councillor Diggle and Councillor Martin, Councillor Mail and Councillor Nicholl and Councillor Wiper and Mr Robert McQuiston are not present but may be along later.
Thanks, Lucy. Before we enter into the meeting properly, can I welcome to the meeting George Jameson and Mel McGill, who are the new Parent Council representatives for the secondary and the primary school sector. It's quite, as I was saying to them before, it's quite a meaty agenda, so it's a good point at which to join the committee. So welcome. So do I have any declarations of interest? No. Okay, so we move on to item 3, the minute of the meeting of the 17th of September 2015 for approval. Are we in agreement? It's a correct record? Right, okay, I think we're agreed on that. Can I just say in 14.1 on page 6, it was noted that I would be writing to Angela Constance, Cabinet Secretary for Education and Lifelong Learning, to express the authority's disappointment that only one school in the region was to receive funding from the Attainment Scotland Fund, compared with over 300 schools in the rest of Scotland. I have actually received a reply from the Cabinet Secretary, and if we could distribute the copy. What I asked was, or what I said in the letter was that using areas of multiple deprivation as a means of defining where the attainment fund should go disadvantages rural areas such as our own. I asked them to look instead at qualifications for free school meal entitlement, and the reply which I've received from Angela actually states that she recognises this may be the case and has asked officials to look into this further, and accepting the fact that because all P1 to P3 pupils are entitled to free school meals anyway, that makes it a little more, it skews the information slightly, but they are considering that. I actually raised that at COSLA Education and Young People's Executive, and we got the agreement there that should also be looked at as a means of identifying deprived areas and rural communities throughout Scotland. Once again, before we move into the body of the meeting, I've had a request for an urgent item, which is on out of Cashman pupil transport for Kirkcudbright Academy. I think we've all probably received emails from concerned parents who have agreed to take a paper dealing with this at the end of the main agenda. So could we distribute copies of the paper, and I'll take an interval at the end of the main agenda so that people can have a chance to look at it properly, and then we can reconvene after that to discuss it. Okay, so if you move to item 4, Education Services Revenue Budget Monitoring Report 2015-16, the period ended 30 September 2015. That's a report from Colin, and Karen will be speaking to this. Karen, is there anything you add to the report?
Thank you, Chair. This report provides members with the position for the education budget as at the end of September. Overall, a break-even position is expected, which reflects a slight improvement from that reported to September committee. There's a small overspend projected within the primary sector. However, this has been offset by underspends in other areas. All of the savings agreed for education are on target to be achieved, and although there's been some delays in the policy development funding, the majority is expected to be progressed as planned, and obviously the small shortfall in the school transport funds subject to a separate paper on this agenda. So I'm just happy to take any questions members may have.
Rob?
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome the update report, and it's sort of good, solid, balanced report we've come to expect from the Director and the Department, I have to say. One question I did want to raise, however, was with regard to paragraph 3.4 and the slightly alarming statement regarding ASL. Given that's been highlighted to us in the way that it has, I mean, I'm aware that we, from memory, which is admittedly an imperfect aid, I think we are keeping an eye on the implementation of the changes to ASL. I wondered, however, since that has been highlighted to us in the terms that it has been, how we're going to keep an eye on this specific risk that's been highlighted to the committee, potentially separately from the routine budget monitoring reports.
All I would add to that is obviously the service review is being progressed as planned, with the exception of the teacher cuts, because obviously it's not possible to reduce the teaching at this stage because of the sanctions on teacher numbers. I think the pressure we're sort of more anxious about is possibly dates to before the service review, and that the non-teaching cover due to additional pupils or additional need is at quite a significant level, and we just need to make sure that we're conscious of that as we move forward, and make sure that we don't have any overspends going forward, and obviously make sure that the review doesn't impact on that.
I think, Chair, Councillor Davidson, I think it's more a cautious note in 3.4 from Karen and our colleagues in Finance for us to be absolutely clear, and we are, that we need to monitor very, very carefully, make sure that where there's any over budget spending, for example, in terms of assistance or learning support assistance, that every opportunity is made to make sure those people come in on budget. We've been doing that, and in fact the big pressure really is around, and it's a corporate pressure really, around how we cope with the fact that some of the savings that were agreed by this committee did probably relate to a reduction in some teacher numbers, and that's where we've had to have contingency measures throughout. But we're confident about delivering. Certainly for next year, it will be more challenging for the following year, but I can assure you that all officers are keeping a very close eye on spend without actually reducing service at this stage.
George?
Regarding 3.5, just a wee bit clarification on the pressure being partially offset by supply teaching costs. There is a wee bit of concern in schools that supply teaching obviously is very important if people are off work. Some teachers are coming to work, well, maybe not 100%, but they're coming to work, they tell us, because they know that the supply teaching, with the best will in the world, is not going to be as good as it would be if they were themselves, and that's highly commendable from the teacher's perspective. And I know that there's been cost savings in supply teaching by reducing the terms and conditions, and I appreciate that, an absolute necessity, but I think it is of concern to parents and pupils that sometimes they're, to use a terrible description, they're getting babysat rather than getting taught. And I know that's a challenge, but I just wondered if there's any more detail on that. Is it just because the payment is less, or schools are using supply teaching less, and if so, is there an impact on the education and on the teachers' welfare?
Chair, can I answer that? Thanks for that question. No, there's no intention to have reduced supply teaching. Okay, it's simply as a consequence of sometimes a struggle to recruit, and it's just to do with the sheer volume of demand sometimes, particularly during a difficult winter, for example, and the recruitment pool that we have and supply pool around Dumfries and Galloway is not enormous, whereas if we were in the central belt, you can sometimes get teachers moving right across authorities coming for a day's work. We don't have that in Dumfries and Galloway. We've done everything we can to widen the supply pool, including attempting to get permanent supply staff, but again, no takers in terms of applications. So it's just to say, just for clarity in 3.5, it's as a consequence of the fact that sometimes we've been unable to get supply, that has resulted in some savings, but it's not an intentional budget strategy. But nonetheless, where there are savings because supply is not there, then we're able to use that to offset some other pressures.
Andy?
Thanks, Chair. I'm going back to 3.4, and part of Mr. Jimson's already asked part of my question. The first line, great pressure and risk, it would be really helpful if that risk was to be quantified. And I don't mean doing the minutiae, You know, is it a risk to the staff, is it a risk to the council, is it a risk to the service, and more especially is it a risk to the children? Because just having an all-encompassing paragraph to say risk, quite frankly, isn't right. We should actually have some clarity on that.
Certainly, I think it's actually just, I'm not being pedantic here, I think it's the wording. We're talking not about the service being at risk, but about the risk around the financial costs if we don't keep a very careful eye on it. So it's purely risk around the finance and the budget, and we don't want to come to committee and say that we've overspent by £4 million, for example. So it has been absolutely clear that we need to manage very carefully that budget. There is always risk because there's a bit of unknown around residential placements that could come up at any point. We have certainly over the 8 years that I've been director, we've always managed that risk. We will continue to manage that risk, but I think it's always important to keep up there the fact that we can't allow that to run away from us, but it's not a risk to the children. Councillor Ferguson.
Jim McCall.
Thanks, Chair. I note in 3.3 there's a saving from non-teaching vacancy. Do these members of staff, are some of them actually in the classroom? And if so, has this had an impact on the classroom experience of the children?
Yeah. Again, if you remember, in terms of non-teachers, in terms of classroom assistants, for example, we had, over the last number of years, often run above formula because it wasn't, didn't have enough ERVS requests, or indeed school rules can fluctuate and you wouldn't necessarily move somebody for the sake of a day. What we've tried to do is manage that more efficiently. So schools are working to formula in terms of non-teachers, and when you add that to some of the supply savings that are unintentional, that's where some of that's been offset from. So that's not having a negative impact on children.
Ian?
Thanks, Chairman. Just a small piece of clarity in regards to page 11. The bottom box, it's just transport. It looks like a projected underspend of £10,900. Is that correct? It's like the forecast is. It seems like that. Just is it under or over? Sometimes it's difficult to understand.
Karen?
Sorry, can you repeat that again? What figure you were referring to?
Yep, it's page 11. You've got the second box, expenditure. It says budget monitor report sector analysis. And under transport, if you go along the boxes to the end, it shows at a minus 10,900. I'm just taking that as an projected underspend. Just clarity on that.
Sorry, yes, that's right, that is an underspend.
Yes, Chair, thanks very much. It's 3.7, Karen. The small reduction in number of grant payments to partner providers. Can you give us a clue? And I appreciate it's maybe no fair dumping in this at this moment in time. A kind of breakdown in 104k, because are we to assume that the partner providers have got everything they need to deliver preschool at the same level and standard as the school nurseries?
Yeah, I think the 104k is between the sort of children's integration and preschool. I think if you look on page 11, the preschool element is only 34,000 of that, so it's relatively small. The small reduction in the partner providers is to do with the social inclusion payments, but I think that's more to do with the new rules and regulations around the 2-year-olds and the 600 hours childcare, so there's actually more support going into preschool than there was like this point last year.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I'm particularly keen to know, and I say it's maybe not a fair question for you here, Karen, maybe we can get it, come back to us, it's the breakdown of that spend between the school provision and the partner provision, because it should be exactly the same, you would hope.
And if we take away the words of the question from you, Councillor, we will report back to you. I'll ask Hugh Smith to look into that matter and find the detail that you're requesting. I suppose what I would say to members, just to reassure you, that in the scheme of the £135 million budget for education, these are relatively small fluctuations that we're talking about. And again, I would want to congratulate Karen and the team for ensuring that we are around that break-even figure.
Thanks, Chair. Going back again to transport on page 11. Why is the projected outturn for transport £270,000 less than the outturn for the previous year?
Again, there has been savings taken within transport, and we are trying to cut it down whenever possible. And I suppose there'd be elements of school transport that have transferred across to planning and environment over the last couple of years as well. So that would explain the difference in that.
Robin?
Thank you, Chair. It's right and proper that we use financial tools to help manage the budget. But one of the questions I'd want to just ask, if it's being addressed or whether it could be, is data that helps us put into the decision-making process things that are difficult to measure but are important to the delivery of the service. One of them would be the illustration of the stresses on teachers as a result of lack of supply. And I was glad that George paid tribute to the commitment of the teachers. But I can't see anywhere there's data to indicate the financial consequences of that, but also there's the personal consequences of that.
Okay, I think that's a good question. I would say that's for different papers, that's in different places. So we bring to you 6 monthly and then yearly reports in terms of performance management around the business plan. And in that paper, you get all of the information about teacher absence and indeed the impact that may or may not have in terms of outcomes for young people. What I would say on that agenda is that our teacher absence has reduced significantly over the last 3 or 4 years and is significantly better than non-teacher across the council. So the indications, the highest level temperature test around stresses on teachers are that we're actually doing quite a good job there, because teacher absence has come down quite a bit. But I would have to say that sort of reporting is more to do with our performance reporting overall, and really this report is simply to give members reassurance, purely technically, financially, that we're managing the budget. But I do accept that that's an important issue.
One supplementary, are there data about the absence of support for learning assistance and that category as a result of all this?
We have got data which was also included in the council stress survey in terms of our action plan moving forward, that would tell us that there is a higher level of absence in support for learning staff than there is elsewhere. That may or may not be surprising. There's a range of issues. It might be the challenge of the job that they've got. Sometimes it can be due to the management arrangements, and because they're peripatetic, you don't have a single manager that's always working with the same person. There's a range of issues, again, that we've reported in exception reports in separate areas. But it is quite interesting to note that ASL staff tend to have a slightly higher absence rate than mainstream teacher staff.
Just on the back of that, I think it's also important to recognise that in the review of the additional support for learning, the critical role of the classroom assistants was recognised, and the efforts they put in, and that we need to address them as professionals and give them a real career progression. Okay, so we can move to the recommendations. On page 7 can be note 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3. Okay. So if we move to item 5, service review supporting lifelong learning, and we've got Lynn Burgess to speak to this.
There's Lynn.
Okay, we've got Lynn. I don't know if you just want to say a few words about the review itself without going into a vast amount of details, because it's obviously a very detailed paper with a lot of information in the appendix. Would you like to add anything?
Yes, good morning. I think I just want to summarise really what the review team found, and that is that lifelong learning is really fundamental to a number of our important strategies within the Council, regional economic strategy and the anti-poverty strategy. The cross-functional nature of the delivery and the range of influences on lifelong learning from a number of different legislation makes it an incredibly complex area. So the outcomes that we're really looking for are about establishing some clarity about what lifelong learning is about, mapping what we have already in terms of delivery and provision, in terms of trying to reduce duplication and identifying any gaps, and also being able to capitalise on innovation and other solutions that are happening, such as the Learning Town. And that's really the three outcomes that are related to the service review scope.
Members? Alistair?
Thank you, Chair. I read the report with interest, and I'll acknowledge the importance of employability and skills. However, I wanted to focus on personal and social development and ask the question in terms of the Council's role in acting, as it were, as a signpost to people and point them in the direction of where they may be able to access certain courses, skills, personal development. We hear a lot, I heard quite recently, about the need for people to interact, and older people often suffer from loneliness, and they need to go and meet others, and so just wanted to ensure that we are proactive in that respect. We can't deliver, we mustn't deliver everything ourselves, but there are partner agencies, and can we act as a signpost to make people aware of where they can go and access courses, facilities, and where they can meet with others?
That's a fundamental part of the review. So the lifelong learning review's first action really is that we have to identify a framework, and that's lifelong learning from birth, or cradle to grave is the terminology. Part of that also is about establishing a mapping of what's out there, and that's not just of what we do, but of what our partner agencies also provide, so that we can signpost and that we have the most up-to-date information available for that.
So this mapping is an ongoing piece of work?
It will be an ongoing piece of work. For example, for employability, we have a very good mapping already because we work to a national framework called the Strategic Skills Pipeline, which maps people from not being in work right through to in-work support. And we're going to use that as a model to expand that into the personal and social development side of lifelong learning also. So, yes.
Andy?
Thanks, Chair. I'm really pleased with this. Just a couple of questions, though. Why did we stop at 65? Given I used to be silver but no hair surfer, there's opportunities here for people over 65, and given that the retirement age is in excess of 65, or will be pretty damn soon. The other question really is, I'm looking at your engagement. I can't see the Older People's Consultative Group there, and I can't see the University of Third Age there. So are we working with other partners other than the old faithfuls?
Yes, we will be. And this is just the engagement list that we have so far is just the results of our small review team. There's a much wider consultation to take place following this. This was just the initial scoping part of it. And we are not stopping at age 65. The framework will go on further. It's maybe just missing from the model, but it shouldn't be.
Okay, I've got no one else in. Oh, George?
I would just like to say I'm really encouraged by this review. I think it's really, really important. I'll go to the other end of the scale. I think at schools, and I know that it's referred to in here, that children going through schools, that's where the seeds of learning start, and a lot of children going through school with not a great idea, maybe they're not fair academic, and they've got a great idea of the importance of learning and skills. And I think the interaction between children, teachers, employers, especially local employers, could improve that. And it is referred to in here, I know that. I just want to, in my professional life with National Farmers Union of Scotland, I work with Skills Development Scotland, and the challenge is somebody mentioned the word signpost, and it's actually making it clear to kids across the board what opportunities are out there to keep, whether it's within the locality or out with the locality. And I think there's a disengagement sometimes because of the pressure on schools. So I think the collaboration is absolutely key in getting engagement between schools, teachers, colleges, etc., etc. So I can only encourage you to take in all stakeholders and see how we can make that a holistic process where everybody buys into, and the cross over well rather than in parallel.
Yeah, that refers specifically to the legislation, which I'm not sure if it's listed in here, but there's a great number of legislation influencing this, and developing the young workforce is a significant one, which refers to what you're talking about.
Move the recommendations. Can we agree 2.1, 2.2, and can we note 2.3? Okay, thank you. Thanks. So if we move to item 6, primary schools capacity update, and we have Claire Renton speak to it. Is there anything you want to add to the report, Claire?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to clarify one number. In terms of section 3.9, bullet point 4 in relation to Noble Hill, the number 323 stated there is still including the general purpose room. What we are looking for is to remove the general purpose as a learning base and take that down to 298. So that bullet point and the associated item in the appendix to read 2.298, so apologies for that. Hopefully the paper is short and reads for itself in terms of what we're trying to do. And what I would just emphasise in terms of the amendments, we're looking at Castle Douglas and Noble Hill in specific. These are items that we are aiming to aspire to, that they wouldn't be happening immediately, to give members reassurance on that. Happy to take questions.
Members?
Just to be clear, I may be reading it incorrectly, but in 3.9 it says about including an update capacity is 257. And page 112, including the capacity is, proposed school capacity is 290. Have I got this wrong there?
No, you're correct. There's an error there too. Apologies. It should read 257. 257 is the correct figure. We'll get that addressed.
Okay, Rob?
Sorry, I didn't think it was me. Okay. I'll think of something to ask then. Castle Douglas, Chairman, I'm aware at the moment that effectively there isn't actually any room in that school right now, to the point where there are children who would be entitled by virtue of the fact they live in the catchment and cannot attend. Clearly, we must therefore be at 389 or above at the moment. So the daft laddie question, because I really don't know the answer, is what is the implication of going down from 389 to 356? The reasons for which I understand and I think are sensible, but clearly if we're at or above 389, what happens when we go down to 356, and what are we going to do to mitigate those problems if it causes problems?
Chair, I'll say something and then maybe ask Claire to elaborate on that. This is what we would be working towards. If we had consistency in terms of GP rooms, etc., we would be working towards these capacities. What we wouldn't do is change that capacity for next session when we've got exactly the situation that you've described. We know that in these schools, actually, in terms of the catchments, the schools are big enough. Our long-term difficulty has been around, as they were building up, we've had a lot of non-catchment kids moving in, and no reason why they shouldn't have, because they're magnet schools, they're nice new buildings, but that has created pressures for us. What we need to do is manage that down in the longer term, and this is about trying to get consistency around capacity in the longer term, but we would, I can assure you, be pragmatic in the sense of not suddenly reducing Castle Douglas by 30 when we know we'll have some of the same difficulties next session.
Thank you, Councillor Davison. I think it's a very pertinent point. Taking forward what the Director's just detailed is there's a number of other items in there. As part of this work, we have looked at the demographics, the projected demographics. We have the demographics and we can see them starting to go down in terms of Castle Douglas. We also look at the number of extraterritorials that have been granted places, and currently there's 42 in that school that have been granted places in Castle Douglas. And then the other item, which is a longer going piece of work for us, is looking at the catchments, because a lot of our catchments have been created where there's been maybe the amalgamation of school closures, maybe church boundaries, church parishes are still relevant, and we do need to take a look at the catchment areas to make sure they are representative of the communities, because we know in some cases they are dividing our communities because there's lines in very strange places. We also want to make sure that our children can be educated in their communities, and the reason I specifically say that in relation to Castle Douglas, we have very strange anomalies in that catchment whereby children that are maybe sitting next to Springham or Gelston are actually catchmented with Castle Douglas and not actually their local schools. So there's a number of items to get sorted out there to support parent choice and support communities.
Andy?
Thanks, Chair. I think it was actually my hand that was up, no Rob's before, but it'll no matter. So it's partially been asked. I'm coming back to Castle Douglas here in particular here because I don't know if you're aware, Chair, but at this moment, as we sit here, there's a briefing meeting for local councillors about the issue at Castle Douglas. And whilst I'm to be really careful what I say here because I don't want to be able to identify a child, but there are, I would suggest, extenuating circumstances, and I appreciate some of the issues will be covered in item 8. But I actually think that as a committee here, in particular about Castle Douglas, we should actually have some form of update, potentially on the feasibility of, if it's required, of some alternative accommodation at Castle Douglas, because we know it's contentious, it's been on the go before, it went through when they built the PPP school, and this is a long-running sore that I think needs to be lanced. And the only way to do that would be to get some form of specialised paper on Castle Douglas.
Well, you're quite right, Councillor Ferguson. There's a meeting at the moment about Castle Douglas. I think if something substantive comes forward about plans for the future, which could either relate to catchment or relate to resource, then it would absolutely be essential that comes in front of this committee. So I agree fully.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mr. Grant, for that explanation. And again, I've been really careful because I don't want to identify it, but one of the parents involved has come to this region to be a teacher, right? And he lives a few hundred yards from the school. And I think, I say, I didn't want to go into item 8 at this stage, but I think there needs to be some sort of common sense takes into place here.
Okay, again, what I would come in on there is to say this part's about policy in terms of how we are consistent about capacity. There's a longer running issue about Castle Douglas about the long-term size of the school and whether there has to be any change there. For any individual people, there are routes to go down, and it might even be that the people you're speaking about have been to an independent appeal over which we have no jurisdiction whatsoever. And I think that needs to be remembered, that that's not for Education Committee to determine for individuals. We've got a process for the council which the sheriff oversees, and the sheriff takes decisions around appeals, but happy to speak offline to you on that, Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks very much. So are we going to get some sort of report for councillors? It doesn't have to be a committee item as long as it was circulated to all councillors. If I get, I'm happy with the chair and your agreement that will take place.
So again, what I would say is, based on the meeting that's going on today, and based on coming to some sort of concrete planning around thoughts for the future, We would absolutely want to keep you informed of that, either through a briefing or at some stage if the committee needs to make a decision, the committee paper will come here. Thank you.
I do think, as it says in item 8, not wanting to rush ahead, up to 45% of the pupils in primary schools don't attend the catchment area. So, that is something which we need to address in the long term. Davy?
Just to follow up on that, Chair, I take it any parent kid gets excluded at present, they can still reapply in the future if a vacancy occurs.
So the current policy states that if you move into a catchment and you're entitled to a place in a school and it's currently full, then you're placed on a waiting list and get free transport to another nominated school. Okay? At the end of that year, it's almost certain that you will. So let's say it was a P2 child. At the end of that year, it's almost certain they will get into their own school for P3, because those children who are on the waiting list get priority, who are catchment kids get priority even above the new P1s coming in. So it's almost certain, it's 99% certain that anybody who does not get a place in the school will normally at the start of the following session gain that place, and in the meantime they get free transport to another nominated school. What happens sometimes, Councillor Stitt, is that they're really happy with their other school and sometimes stay there.
Rob? Hey, Jim.
Thanks, Chair. It's an observation maybe rather than a question, so it's simply the point that Colin made is quite right. I had a case just the other day there where a family going to move in within 100 hours of the school and can't get in because the school's already full. But last week we approved through the Housing Subcommittee support for a new development, 50 houses, and I presume this is the rhetorical thing, or it's not a question so much as an observation. I hope we're building up capacity to deal with the additional build in all of these communities, because there are clearly pressures going to be placed on schools within the immediate future that maybe not apparent now.
Okay.
Thank you for that question. Just to let committee know that we've been working extensively with our colleagues in planning to understand the local development plan, the implication about housing developments, and to get an early warning with both private and social housing about when developments are starting and what the likely output is. What we're hoping to do is bring a paper to Education Committee early next year to detail a council policy regarding being proactive about that and planning for it. It is a very complex area, and I think we feel we've made a lot of good progress in identifying where the pressure points are, being proactively aware, and to start planning our estate strategy around them. And hopefully that'll give you some insight to the level of work that's been happening.
Thanks for that, Chair. I'm pleased, because there's nothing better than seeing something coming and dealing with it before it actually gets there.
Alistair?
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at paragraph 3.4 and I agree totally with the rationale behind there, the need for GP facilities in school, because that's essential for the deliverance of the curriculum. However, when I then look at the worked examples on pages 17, no, page 101 to 103, I note that whereas example 1 specifies the GP area, examples 2, 3 and 4 do not specify the GP areas. I wondered why that was. Are these theoretical examples or taken from an exact particular situation? If we do not specify the GP areas, is this a way, always try to be helpful, and is this a way perhaps to try and address a situation of overcrowding? If you've got a very large GP area, could you create a classroom out of that? But the first question is why are these GP areas not identified? Why is the area not identified? Some reason for that.
Okay.
I could pass back to government on that, because that's their guidance in terms of just working documents. Do you want to say anything?
The only thing I would add to that, Alistair, is that sometimes these spaces aren't actually physically rooms. They're associated areas. It might be a larger corridor area that's a breakout space for all different classrooms to use. So from the models that the Scottish Government pulled together, they looked at all local authorities and the models that they used, and some authorities had that as a solution. So rather than a dedicated room, it was perhaps a large corridor or an area that 4 classrooms had lost a bit of space to create a collective, so it doesn't mark it down as a floor space as such.
I think just to clarify, so these are working documents from the government. They've taken examples from different authorities. What we're bringing forward, that we're looking for to be Dumfries and Galloway policy, is that we do not include GP rooms as classrooms. That's what's being brought forward today in terms of long-term capacity setting for our schools, so that all of the children get the benefits from the spaces as they should do. But what we're recognising is that we need to be pragmatic in the short term about where there are some bulges in budget pressure and classroom size pressures. That's what the paper's asking you to do.
Okay. Thanks, Chairman. It's just a point. When you look at that, I think it's page 14 of the appendix, or 98 of the Artsville report. It talks about the flexible approach. When you look through that, it's something. You can almost read it as there's clear formulas in there, and it comes across sometimes as a wee bit clinical as you're reading through it. But I suppose my point is, certainly for thinking of different particular scenarios, but within my ward, and this is essential that something like this is put into place to bring. There's a bit of displacement in Annan. It's heavy in some primary schools and not in others, but in more than the rural setting, I think it's not an exempt item that any other business. It's not exempt. It's about the kind of out of catchment rural transport issue that we'll have to face up to, and this is about placement. So I'm just thinking, when it comes to school closures in rural in particular, is there enough flexibility within this to address potential out of catchment placements? Because it does seem a bit clinical, or does this leave enough room for manoeuvrability in regards to accommodating parents that are looking to place their children out with the catchment area?
Yeah, I'm not sure the two things would be connected here, Ian. I think clearly we need to look at school closures. We're talking about that in other papers. We need to consider whether the council then has the capacity in local nearby schools to accommodate. But certainly, I suppose what we wouldn't necessarily be looking for that as an exceptional situation. We would hope that in the planning overall there would be space in because quite often when schools close, there are a few catchment schools, a few other schools that can be nominated, and that in itself should sort out any exceptionality rather than having to change the policy.
Aaron?
Thanks, Chair. I would add to that, when you look at the schools and the number of classrooms they have, and you crunch the numbers going from the 2 metres squared that we allocate to a child down to 1.7, it does create more space, but actually what we end up being governed by is class composition and maximum teacher numbers. So in some places, it will create 1 or 2 more spaces in a school. An example being Hardgate. It's got a room that's 45 metres squared. We may be able to get 1 or 2 more children inside that particular school, but generally on the whole, it doesn't add capacity across the board.
Thanks very much for that, Chairman. I feel my concerns are alleviated in regards to, in particular, what Colin said, around about if there's potential to expand the catchment area. That alleviates any concerns I've got in regards to that.
Jim? Thanks, Chair. Can I take it from what has been said that there will be ongoing work to review school catchments in advance of these proposed capacities being introduced?
So what this policy is asking members to agree is a consistent approach to setting capacities. Okay? What we're saying is that we will not immediately set those capacities or change those capacities, particularly where there's areas of pressure. As a separate but linked issue, over the long term, we need to do an overall review of catchment right across the authority, but it's an enormous piece of work. And what we're doing in the meantime is we're probably starting that process in Dumfries and then beginning to look wider. But as soon as you review a single catchment for one school, it affects other schools. So it's a really big piece of work that we're not quite ready to undertake, but we will undertake that. And as I say, you're not actually committing to anything, say, for next year in terms of this capacity paper. This is about being consistent about the longer term capacities. But I agree that the two things are linked together. Okay.
Okay, members, can we move to the recommendations? Can we note 2.1, agree 2.2, and note 2.3? Thank you. So if we move to item 7. Okay, this is the School Transport Contingency Fund and Revised School Transport Policy, and we have Neil Carruthers to speak on this. Is there anything you want to add to the report, Neil?
Yeah, I'll just add a few things in this just to introduce the report. One is in relation to paragraph 3.3 in the report. There's a slight update on that in that we now have 45 applications, 25 of which have been successful with an outturn expected spend of 6,250 from the fund. The report offers revised policy as well. Revised transport policy. We took the opportunity to do that because the existing transport policy made no reference to this matter or this fund. That's now inserted under 4.2 policy. I'm just conscious as well, and we'll finish on this, that we are due to look at a unique circumstance affecting transport provision for out-of-catchment schools at Kirkcudbright Academy. And I don't think that that issue should preclude any decisions on this report as relating to transport policy, because it's an out with policy issue. I have nothing else to add, and happy to answer questions.
Members? Neil?
Thanks, Chairman. I suppose when it comes to this, I see the differences between the existing and what's been proposed, but got a particular circumstance within my own ward, and I think it's got to come up across the whole of D&G when it comes to the closure of schools and the school transport issues. And there's a pressure there. We have an ongoing fund here. There's an underspend, I should say, an ongoing underspend in regards to this funding stream. I just wonder, how could we possibly connect it up to that particular type of exception? Again, we've got exceptional circumstances, certainly in my ward, and I can see that being the case in other parts of the region. I just wonder if we've got any views in regards to how we could possibly, through this, or do we have a different mechanism that we could actually use to try and provide with this type of pressure, Chairman?
Paul?
Thanks, Chair. I think the question of exceptions is always a difficult one, because the whole point is fairness and applying things consistently. And as Neil Carruthers has mentioned, we are going to have a look at a paper later on about potentially a short-term contingency measure that's out with policy. I think members will recognise that this funding has been underspent, and that presumably allows us to continue it moving forward. It's been a good support around the anti-poverty agenda. I think it is true that as we're going into a new range of school closure agenda, which we haven't had for some time, there can sometimes be anomalous scenarios that arise, particularly if there's only one child left in a school during a period after you've decided to close, for example. And I would not be unhappy as director to suggest that, that we might be able to consider really exceptional circumstances, temporary around school closure measures that could be considered as meriting support from this fund, if that's what you're asking about. But we would also need to be careful that in doing that, we didn't jeopardise the school closure process, because when we commence a school closure consultation, it's not on the basis that we're anticipating the outcome. So if you would allow officers to look at very individual circumstances in relation to that, I wouldn't be uncomfortable in considering, if members thought that was worth consideration, as an exception.
Thanks very much for that response, Chairman. I appreciate that, and I totally understand the fact that we shouldn't be seen to be influencing a closure in any way whatsoever, and that's certainly not the intention here, but much appreciated if that can be taken forward.
Andy?
Thanks, Chair. I think it's kind of a question for Neil, and maybe I think there needs to be an extra recommendation in here, because I know Neil has taken the opportunity to amend to reflect things in the policy, and that's right, and it is prudent to do so. But I'm actually wondering here, how does the school transport strategy fit within the wider Swestrans and community transport initiative strategies? Because we should be looking at the whole thing here, and should we have a specific school strategy, or should it be part of a bigger strategy, of which the school part is integral? That's my point.
Neil?
I think that there are two separate issues here. I, in my capacity within education services set the policy and govern that. The provision of transport to then meet that policy, or to meet those that are deemed eligible in that policy, is taken over by colleagues in infrastructure and commissioning. Now, I think they look with various partners through South West Trans at the bigger picture. My concern would be that we have quite a concise policy in terms of school transport, and if we try and widen that to look at a much bigger picture, it would become possibly unmanageable. So,
can I come back in, Jeff? Thank you. I think so, and I'm no suggesting we do through you, Chair. I think we should have a look at how the school's transport strategy fits within the Swestrans strategy, and where, when it is doable. I'm thinking particularly some remote rural areas where we're having real difficulty getting transport for people, and we get constantly the yellow buses sitting in the school all day when they could be getting potentially used for other things. Now, I appreciate there are challenges in that. Yeah, I'm asking here, can we look at that in the wider Swestrans and Community Initiative transport strategy? That's the point I'm getting at.
Colin?
I feel, Chair, I'll check with governance, but that would be a matter for the other committee, EIEI committee, to look at. Our remit is to have an education policy. It's not about the implementation of that through the transport available. So while it's a very reasonable point that you're making, that might be one that you might be able to take to the chair of the committee that would be responsible for that.
Briefly, Andy.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for that explanation, Colin. And I think, given your explanation, the route is probably quite rightly through EEI, and we'll take it down that route. But I think it makes common sense to people, particularly in the remote rural areas, when there's a potential solution to transport problems, that we actually look at them all.
Ian, you want to come back?
Please, if it's on the same point, very similar issue was discussed at Swestrans last week. And I think if Councillor McCulloch had been here, he would have said, but there's a meeting organised for the 5th of December, and I'm sure education are invited to that in regards to community transport, so I would imagine they will have their input there over at Castle Douglas.
Rob?
No, just a brief query on the responsibilities of parents and pupils, etc. It's on 126, 125, 126. How are these responsibilities communicated to those various stakeholders? I'm perhaps thinking particularly of responsibilities of pupils. It's on page 126.
Thank you. That's actually the current policy, not the refreshed policy. But we do have a guidance note that we send out separate to the policy. So the policy stands, and on an annual basis, we produce a guidance to parents booklet, which is then sent out to everyone who's currently in receipt of or has applied for school transport.
And to pupils as well, the responsibilities, how are they communicated?
Through the parents and also throughout the school.
Okay, thank you.
Ronnie?
I think Ian's answered it on the Swestrans part of it, so I think that makes sense. That what we're doing here is, we're trying to fit a policy in. It's on tackling the anti-poverty agenda, it's on health, it's additional support needs, it's on about financial hardship. And if there is any ways we can do that, in conjunction with the Swestrans aspect in the policies, yeah, that's fine, but we can't lose this policy if things didn't work out, so we've got to concentrate on what we've got here.
Thanks, Ronnie. Okay, so if we can move to the recommendations. Can we note, and also what we need to note is the revised level of applications and expenditure rather than the figures which are actually in the paper itself. So can we note the revised level of application and award to the fund to date? Yep. And 2.2, can we agree to the introduction of the refreshed school transport policy in December 2015. Okay, members? No, Ian?
I mean, maybe Colin would sum it up better than me, but I'll just a reminder what we agreed in as far as I think it was maybe actions on the director.
So perhaps a third recommendation, it could be that members agree to officers considering the legitimacy of exceptional circumstances surrounding school closures in relation to exceptional funding.
Right.
You know, I've no problem with considering, but it's got to be done within that aspect of what this fund is actually for, about the health, aspects, about the additional support needs and about financial hardship, and within that criteria, within that closure, that might be something that is looked at anyway. But
it may therefore be, rather than in relation to this specific fund, rather than that, it might be an action that officers have to go away to have a look at in terms of transport and the situations that arise exceptionally around the transition from school closure decision to actual school closure. And we would just go away as an action from that.
It's more about the policy itself rather than the actual funding for the specific fund.
Thanks for that, Chairman. I did note the slight underspend of 10.9 earlier, and that's why I pointed it out. Thank you.
Okay, so if we move to item 8, which is on page 129, it's the amendment to enrolling in schools policy. We've got Neil again to speak to this one. Is there anything you want to add, Neil?
Just briefly, by way of introduction, the legislation and guidance at a national level relating to school enrolments is quite complex and can be open to interpretation. As outlined in the paper, we've faced a fairly significant and growing number of appeals against decision, and the policy has been revised in light of our review of the appeals process that took place this year, which had necessarily involved legal colleagues. I don't have anything else to add by way of introduction.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just a couple of questions, and I'm glad to hear that the legislation's complex, because it's a couple of complex questions. Under 3.5 and 3.6, if a parent wants to enrol their child at an alternative school and that is appealed, turned down, and they try to get into their catchment school and the catchment school is full and they can't go, and there's another alternative offered to them, are they entitled to free school transport because they are not going to the school that they're supposed to be in? The reason I asked that is I had a situation, and it relates to school closures, but it was a number of years ago, where the children that were at the school and their siblings were given free transport to a choice of schools, one of which was not the eventual catchment area. And then we had the situation where school transport was passing by 6 children from the same village as the siblings of pupils that had been at the school to take them to the school that they were at, and they were being left because the change was made in the size of bus because of entitled pupils. Now, is there anything in this that is going to make that actually clearer, or is there anything that will actually make it more difficult? And also, just as regards school closures, if, and I emphasise the if here because I'm not going to prejudge any other papers that are in the meeting, if a school was to close, the terms of 7 of the new policy under school closure would be implemented and not any other provision of the school transport policy, because that could be important.
Neil?
It is indeed a complicated question. In reviewing this policy, we are trying to make the process which we operate clearer. So we, at the moment, hold a place open in a catchment school for someone who has made a decision to put in a placing request. And that leads to issues for the service in terms of we can't complete that process. In the circumstance where someone makes that placement request and the door closes behind them, and they would not in that case be eligible to receive school transport because they're not going to a catchment school. If they then reapply to get back into their catchment school and again can't do that because it's full, the decision would ultimately, I think, have been theirs, and the position that would be in terms of transport policy would be not to provide school transport for that. I'm conscious in saying all that, however, that there are a number of pupils throughout the area that are able to access grace and favour transport. So, in a number of circumstances, you know, we may be able to help people. But again, I think from a policy perspective, no, the decision would be with the parent. So they would be making a choice to go to a non-catchment school. I hope I've answered the questions that you posed.
If I can come back in on that one. The parents made the choice of which school to go to. There was no the catchment school. And they were left in a situation where school transport, the size of the bus was changed. They were not getting grace and favour anymore. The only solution that we could come up with is apply to your catchment school, which was a large town school, which was way over capacity. And I was assured that, well, they're not going to get in there because the class sizes, etc., are bumping the limits. And they would be offered an alternative, and the alternative would probably be the school that they were at through choice. But because we couldn't give them an entitlement to go to the catchment, they would then provide free school transport.
I think, Chair, if I could come in, I think this links back to the earlier question that we had about when you apply to go to your own catchment. If you move into the area and there isn't a space for you that year, if you leave in your application, it's almost certain, if you're a catchment pupil, that you'll get in the following year. Yeah, okay, because you move up to the top of the list even beyond P1s coming in, all right? The actual situation you described was, our worry was people applying every year and not getting in and coming back out and trying and free transport arising. So what we're saying here is, and I think it's really critical that members understand the absolutely crucial question that we're asking for support here is that at the moment, when somebody applies to go out with their own catchment, we hold a place for them just now. That causes a heck of a stress on others who are trying to get into that school where that place is sitting, because they've got to wait for this person who's applied to go elsewhere to go through all the processes and appeals to see if they get in, to see if this place is available. And you've got to decide, is that fair or not? And what we're trying to get to is a scenario where we want all of our schools to be terrific. We want the choice that we've got. We want parents, there is a parent charter. Parents have got choices of schools. Parent can make a decision to apply for a school that's not in their own catchment area. But coming with that, they need to get their own transport. And they also need, we feel, they should recognise that they shouldn't be able to affect others in the school that they would normally be going to. So we're really asking you to agree that if somebody applies for a school somewhere else, that we no longer maintain that place for them, but we should recognise that that's not forever. And this is me coming back to the first point. They may find that the door has closed behind them for that year, okay, and that allows us to move the process forward, but they would be entitled to come back the following year and be very likely to have a place in that school if they felt they had made an error. Okay, so I think that gets quite a fair balance and maybe the best of both worlds, allows us to make the process smoother and clearer, and to some extent might well encourage more parents not to scatter their ideas but actually move ahead in terms of transition to the school that they were due to go to. And that's really what the paper's asking you for.
George?
Yeah, I'll try not to make it any more complex than it is, but we had a discussion with the Dumfries and Galloway Forum last night, and some of it refers back to Agenda Point 6. And it was, to be fair, it was led by Castle Douglas parents, but we moved on to the broader issues of which Collins referred to. I've been involved in the appeals procedure for a couple of years now, so it's very complex and it's very stressful for everybody involved. I think the first point was that, and I think you're addressing this in agenda point 6, is that anybody within a catchment should have the availability of a catchment place, and obviously they're addressing that with looking at catchment areas, which I think that's highly commendable. The second issue, I totally agree that the consequences of too many appeals going through sets everybody back. And it's both administration-wise for parents on both sides. But I just want to put the little devil's advocate bit in that with this, with losing the door shutting, if you like, on your own catchment, it's going to make parents think longer and harder about applying, which is absolutely correct. But we must acknowledge the fact that there will be legitimate cases. And in the appeals I've been involved with, maybe a 6 a day, probably 1 out of the 6 was legitimate. So we must use good communication in advance of this thing happening before people go through this process and have the doors shut. My final point, not to labour it, the other issue that came up again, largely from the Castle Douglas area, was probably driven a wee bit by disappointment at not being successful in the appeals. There was a question mark on the appeals procedure itself, not to put too fine a point at the people on the panel. And the proposal was that these people must be trusted, they must be well trained and be fit for purpose if they're sitting on a panel. And I know the whole idea is to have parents on that panel, and having been on there myself, it is quite demanding. So from a personal perspective and from the perspective I got back from parents, is that we need to have confidence that there's good training given to people that sit on the panel so that there's trust on all sides.
Julie?
Thank you. Agreed that it's a demanding and stressful process for all concerned, and I think we would all wish not to be in those panels. It is an independent panel, it's not run by Education Services, and it reports to the Sheriff. So, and I certainly would support your recommendation that we ask legal services to produce and provide regular training for those that are on the panel. I think your point regarding communication is also really important. I do not want to see another 49 appeals for schools that we know, and we have known for some time, are very full. So if we can communicate with parents well, with information on our public website about the current capacities, the current role, and not so much the likelihood of having a place, but really working with parents in advance of them making that decision, then they are making it with good information to hand.
Ian?
Thanks, Chairman. I agree with the recommendations as we go forward, but the bit that's missing for me is just, it's for all members of the committee rather than just the councillors. It's just to get a clearer understanding. I would quite like some kind of seminar in regards to, because 6, 7 and 8, all these, this agenda and the 2 previous mixed right in with this. There's a lot of confusion and mixture between them, but I think it's the right approach in general terms, but I'd like to seminar to discuss a bit further in regards to any further improvements that we might be able to make. Again, I go back to the point in Annan in particular, with one school, it's the largest school role in Dumfries and Galloway, with others that are struggling to sustain their roles. So there is an issue there, and it's across Dumfries and Galloway, but complex to say the least. And I know in my casework, the amount of casework that's come forward in regards to appeals, it's in the last 2 years in particular, has been much heavier than the 5 or 6 before that. Thanks, Chairman.
Same point, Chair.
I think Gillian wants to do that.
I'm happy to support a seminar and any information that members require, because it is very complex and the policies do integrate clearly. We've benefited a great deal from our legal services colleagues, and I think it's helpful to have them involved too.
Jim?
It was the same point. It's a pity Jilly came in first, because we had a social work seminar on the Friday a week past, and on the Monday, and we could have held it in a phone box down the street. There's something wrong. Members are not supporting seminars, and whilst it's a positive approach, it ain't working, and it's unfair. It would be far better having a 1 hour, because this is what social work have done. Not that I promote anything they do as being a council policy. They've decided to have an hour at the end of a meeting when members are already there to deal with specific issues, because seminars ain't working.
Okay, I think that's quite a pertinent point to make. So we can take that on board in terms of arranging Andy?
No, that's just the very point, actually. That's what social work doing. I think it's a very good idea. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was just my long, complex questions. My last one wasn't actually answered. That if we capital I, capital F school closures actually take place, that clause 7 of this will be paramount. No other policy, including transport policy, will be what is actually implemented.
Where's clause 7?
Yes, that's correct. Part of the school closure, last year when we brought this to you, when a school is closed, student pupils are entitled to transport if they meet the distance requirements. That's the critical factor.
Members? So if we can... Oh.
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief point, and it's more in relation to sort of future-proofing our schools. And I know certainly in the Lockerbie cluster, for instance, we've got a couple of schools that are at capacity, and we do seem to have something in the water over that way because our projections for birth rates and what have you is higher than, say, the rest of the region. So are we looking at future projections, making sure that the schools have the capacity for the local communities? Because I wouldn't like to think that in 5 years' time we have this policy and actually 10 catchment kids couldn't get into school. So, I mean, the region's different, and it's looking at them all separately. And very briefly, the other issue, we were going to look at a catchment review of the Annan area. Have we done anything further with that?
Julian?
The first point is that I think it was Scrutiny Committee. Members have requested a review of the projected numbers, and I know internal audit are in the final process of that. We've all been involved in looking at where the numbers come from, what trusted sources we use and how we use these numbers. So certainly we've had some advice from internal audit on that, and I'm sure that will be reported back to their committee. In terms of the review of the catchments, we were committing to do that during 2015-16 as part of the cluster working review. It's a huge task, but I think we do need to look at where the pressure points exist, and that's what we're starting to do.
So if we can move to the recommendations, can we agree 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3, and note 2.4? Ian?
Would it be okay to put a seminar vote on at the end of an education committee in regards to this item in particular, but I think it takes in item 6, 7 as a theme throughout the whole lot, just to get a better understanding for but all members of the committee, not just the councillors.
I think timing-wise, there is an ad hoc education committee there is an education committee in January. It's about the 20th of January, I think. And I don't think there are a huge number of papers involved there. It may be that we could have, after that committee, the opportunity for other members to join us too, but a little bit of a more informal presentation around enrolment and appeals, and that's a particularly appropriate time to do so, because that's when just in advance of when you might start getting contact from your constituents.
Okay. Just in terms of that, given that it's going to be at the end of the education committee, it might be worthwhile inviting all members of the council to attend. Okay, so if we can move to item 9, which is strategy for educational provision of children and young people with autistic spectrum disorders, severe and complex learning difficulties, and social, emotional, and behavioural needs in Dumfries and Galloway. There's an update on that. John Kaywood. Is there anything you want to add to the report, John?
This is an update on the strategy we presented to you at the March committee meeting. Just a couple of points I wanted to draw your attention to. 3.2, we've mentioned that we're conducting an audit of the learning centres across the region. We expect to have that audit completed round about the end of February, and obviously we'll be looking at the outcomes of that in terms of how we're planning to go forward. And the other point to draw to your attention is in 3.5, that we have now established a project board to plan for the establishment of the ASD discrete facility, and Angela Patterson is to be chair of that board in line with our principle of multi-agency planning towards this provision.
Members? Dick?
Yeah, I've just got a few questions for you. In the last report, it said that the provision will be a discrete facility for children with ASD, and it will give the opportunity to develop a specially designed autism-friendly environment, enable opportunities for providing a highly individualised curriculum for children and young people attending. Is that still the case?
Yes, that's the way we're planning to go forward. Yeah.
You've set up a project board. Does this involve professionals and also parents' representatives?
The professionals ran the table, and the intention is to ensure that we've got a parent voice.
It mentions an outreach service to places outside Dumfries. Obviously, you're still doing the review of the learning centres, and there could be quite considerable investment needed to provide a good service for children for autism. How do you see that progressing?
I think it's important that the two go hand in hand, that we identify a discrete facility which is intended to support the most needy youngsters on the spectrum, but alongside that, to provide an outreach service across the region to support schools who often face very challenging issues in trying to maintain young people within their own schools. Part of what we're doing is developing a range of training programs, and as a part of that, we're developing a core competency for staff to identify areas of skill where they may need updating. For example, we've got already established an e-learning facility which is already in place, and there's a range of longer term planning going on around that.
Just one more.
Colin?
Can I just come in on that, Chair? Just in terms of the investment and finance, I think it's really important to be clear that where we have a number of young people who go out with the region, very needy young people in terms of their autistic condition, the packages and plans around those young people can be really, and I use the word extortionate, really incredibly expensive, both in terms of the educational provision elsewhere and the residential provision elsewhere, and quite often those kids could get better outcomes if we had provision within Dumfries and Galloway. So part of this agenda is to provide really top class and good provision for young people here, but we would think at the moment, if we were able to do that, it wouldn't need investment, it would actually deliver significant savings for the council if we were able to do so.
Yeah, and I think we need to recognise that stability is important with these youngsters who've got very severe ASD needs. And finally, Dick?
Yeah, final one. There's concern about there is a sort of statement here that there will be an equity provision across the region. So hopefully that will be the case, that we're working towards that. There's also concern about transition, post-school transition, and what provision is available for children with or young people with ASD will be. Obviously, how are you going to make provision within the region so that the young people don't have to go out with the region?
To answer the first part of your question, obviously we need to see what the outcome of our audit of the learning centres is going to be, but whatever recommendations we come up with, they'll have to be part of the school's capital project process anyway, and I'd expect them to be integrated with that, and obviously working with Schools for the Future team. With regard to longer term provision, we already have a range of processes in place to try and ensure positive destinations for all pupils, but particularly those with additional needs. Part of our planning for provision for autism is obviously to improve our future planning and the processes that are in place. And we have to use the resources that are out there, if you will, in terms of what's available. But we keep working towards improving the processes that are already in place. I can't speak for post-school provision other than the kind of provision that's out there in our own communities, such as adult resource centres and independent living facilities and so on. And obviously a number of our pupils, when they leave school, go on to that kind of provision. We look for any positive work placement experiences, future training, if a number of youngsters go into further education, and some have gone into higher education and supported employment.
Stu, do you want to add something?
Could I just come in on the answer to the last point there? It hasn't been published yet because the figures were only agreed yesterday. In conjunction with Phil Stewart from the Employment and Skills team, we've done a separate review of the destinations of school leavers with ASD over the last 2 years. What we plan to do on the basis of that is having recognised the need, is to build better plans for their transition. And we've been very fortunate just within the last 2 weeks to be informed of funding from the Scottish Government for the Autism Transitions Programme. And our project officer is setting up a project initially in the Stewartry and in Upper Nithsdale. The plan is to expand it over the next couple of years into other areas. To encourage 15 to 25-year-olds, so working across the transitional stage, in getting involved in artistic and music projects as a way to meet and engage with the wider community.
George? John? brief. Yeah, I'm sure that'll be taken into consideration. I'm conscious of the time, the length of the. Andy?
Thanks. Yeah, again, our parent behind me is saying, can you preempted me a wee bit, but my question was a twofold part for John, and it really was about support for parents and also carers, and how are we working with partners like the NHS and third sector, people like enabling that to actually provide all-round training for everyone. And I'm particularly pleased to see the recognition, the value of the non-teaching staff. And I'm really pleased to see that there's a training framework in progress just now. Have we got any idea how long that's got to be to come to fruition, or is it still a work in progress?
Jim? Yeah. Paul? John? Jim?
But no, it's not. Aye. But some of them aren't working, or aren't we all? A yes or no will be fine. I know you talked about pilot schemes and you talked about the introduction of music in relation to education provision that you're describing here. Is it effective? Does it help?
Yes, it can help with some youngsters. Yeah.
I'm just conscious of item 10 and I just wanted to establish whether or not that was useful or not. Thank you.
I thought you said a yes would be sufficient.
I'll be parochial in a minute.
Okay, if we can move to the recommendation. I think we've noted the progress which has been made. Quite happy with that? Yep. Okay, moving to item 10. Music service, additional information requests, and it's Gillian to speak to this one. Yeah. Gillian, is there anything you want to add to the report?
Not really. This is simply a request for information. I think there are some quite important messages in this report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Members? No? No. Jim Dempster?
It's not a question, maybe just another message. I've met with the SSPBA, which is Scottish Schools Pipe Band Association. They've got a director, they run projects, and in Upper Nissel they run a particular project. And I know in here there's a reference to SIMDs and the low uptake from these kind of groups. And the Schools Pipe Band Association granted £30,000 to a scheme provided the community raised the other 30. That they've done, and there's now about 40 or 50 pupils enrolled in this scheme. I'd be interested to know whether that's the same 40 or 50 that appear to be taking up the school's instrumentation provision or no, but it's just an illustration what can be done within communities with the will, because there is no doubt, and this organisation are coming to meet with some members of staff to show them what they're doing, but there is evidence that it addresses all the things that are outlined in 3.5, behaviour, attitude, etc., in a positive way. So that's an observation. I think that's a good scheme and the kind of thing we might be aspiring to if we can find funds to deliver the type of instrumentation tuition that we would like to see. But in 3.4, it talks about an annual Creative Scotland grant and it supports opportunities for pupils across Dumfries and Galloway. I'd be interested to know whether that's all schools and how many pupils have taken advantage of that, because there are anecdotal evidence, or is anecdotal evidence, that there's sometimes not a lot of opportunities in some schools simply because the provision isn't there. And that's not a criticism, it's an observation.
June?
Thank you. If I could come back on both of those points. The first are regarding community music making. It's important, music making is important to members as it is to us, but it's an expensive non-statutory service. And we're in the business of evidence-based decision making, policy making, and some of the recommendations from the national report talk about better partnerships, sponsorship, working with private and community music making associations. And I think that's something we could do more of. The second point is to look at the evidence that we have in front of us. I can't answer your question regarding the Creative Scotland grant, who benefits, what SIMD profile they have, who's on free school meals. We don't have a great deal of evaluation on our instrumental instruction service. That's what members asked me to go and look at. That's what we've done. We did a tabletop review. A head teacher did this for us. And I think it's come out over to me that we do spend 1.2 million on our instrumental non-statutory service. And it is intuitive that it is a good thing, but there is certainly information that we could do. We could find out more about it, members.
I think it would. It's me. I think it would be useful if we got some detail, Gillian, without obviously consuming large amounts of your time to do such a thing. It just, members should be aware of what's being delivered when, where and how. And I know it's a given and I know it'll happen, but I would presume that the Education Authority and the Education Committee will embrace the type of initiatives that are being introduced in my ward and elsewhere.
Jim McClung?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. There's a lot of interesting information in this. It's just in reference to at the beginning of the report of the Systema and the report on the 31st of March. I can see that no further discussions have taken place with officials to date, which wasn't actually what the decision of the 31st of March was, but can I have some clarification about why we decided not to talk to them again until the outcome of the 2018 service review, and when is that service review likely to come in front of us so that we can involve Systema again, and did we actually speak to Systema and say, look, we'll come back and talk to you once this review is completed?
I think it would be fair to say that the officers involved had not spoken to Systema, and the report is due back in front of members in February, and I'll ensure that we have a fuller update for members as to how that will progress. In fairness, I suppose we recognise that there were gaps in our knowledge about the music service provision, And the thought about moving forward with more provision without having a full evaluation and analysis on our current position seemed to me to be not quite pragmatic. But no, the conversations did not take place. I think that's suffice to say.
Briefly, John.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's just the details that are on page 157. The details for 11-12 appear to be missing. Could we have a full table for 9-10 to 15-16? Because 11-12 appears to be missed.
Sorry, I did not notice that.
Yeah, if you can just email that out to all members. Yeah. Robin?
Thanks, Chair. There's a relation in the point I want to make here to what I said earlier. I think this money is extremely well spent because it contributes to the agenda that I and my two colleagues are here to promote, which is helping pupils articulate that dimension of life which the national documents now call spiritual development. And music is one of the deep ways in which that can be articulated. So I would strongly urge this review to show its benefit in terms of the recognising that it's difficult to measure.
Andy?
Thanks. I'd just like to echo that because Ronnie and I and Jock have seen a huge difference that music can make in a school, in our own word. And I actually think we should be appreciative, and we should actually be recognising the value of music as setting the tone across the whole school and the way the whole ethos of a school operates. And I think it's hugely important, and we should be supporting it as much as we can.
Ronnie?
Yeah, I think as you're absolutely right, Andy. The value of music can't be underestimated. But what we're looking at here is, we've got money here for providing music that we don't have to really, but we do because we want to do it, and we realise the importance of doing that. And it's how to get that region-wide. I know that if you start to concentrate on one specifics, like one way of doing something in a certain area, the cost might be prohibitive and it might take away from other regions. That's why it's got to be a region-wide look at the whole aspect and not just concentrating on one certain aspect. Jim brought up some very good ideas, very good, about what happens in his area, and if they can do that, that's fantastic. And it's a big melting pot of ways to do things, so it's not just looking at one way of thinking. I think that's important when you go back and have a look at that.
Move to the recommendations. Can we note 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, 2.4, 2.5? And acknowledge the detail. I think it's been a very useful report, bringing together all this disparate information, just showing where the effort is going within the region. So thanks for that, Sergio. If we move to item 11 on page 161, and we have Joanne Wright speaking. Is there anything you want to add, Joanne?
Nothing really to add to what's in here, but as means of an introduction, I've brought you the Parenting Improvement Plan on behalf of the Early Years Group. It's one of the priority actions in the region's Children's Services Plan, and parenting is really a priority at both a national and a local level at the moment. And a lot of it is our shift in emphasis is around what the Joint Inspection of Children's Services told us about equity of provision and shifting things so that everyone in the region can get the services that they require. Happy to take any questions.
Members? No? It's quite an easy ride, isn't it? So if we can move to the recommendations. Can we note 2.1, 2.2, and agree 2.3 to ongoing development? Okay. Thanks, John. So moving to item 3, which is 12, sorry. It's these glasses. Item 12, which is the property building school asset class update. We have Claire and Lauren speaking to this. And once again, can I ask members if they've got queries about any individual school, can they raise it with the officers outside the meeting? Okay. So Claire and Lauren, is there anything you want to add to the report?
Thanks, Chair. Nothing to add at this specific point, but I'm happy to answer any questions that members have.
Members on the report generally? Okay. Nope. In that case, can we move to the recommendation? Can we note 2.1, 2.2 and 2.3? Okay. Moving on to item 13, rural school provision, Drochduil Primary School. And we've got Claire speaking to this. Claire, something you want to add to the report?
Many thanks, Chair. Just 2 points I just want to alert members to is under 3.2, we have had an additional pupil admitted to the school in October, so that brings the pupil roll up to 4 pupils. And I just want to clarify in 3.10 about the nearest council building. The building's no longer available in Dunraget, so the nearest council buildings to Drochduil are in Glenluce and Castle Kennedy. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Claire. Members? No? So can we move to the recommendation to, I think we need to once again note the updated position with regard to the school role. And 2.2, agree that a statutory consultation should be commenced during 2015-16. Okay. Thank you. So moving to item 14, which is on page 197, rural school provision, St. Peter's Roman Catholic Primary School, Dalbeattie. And Claire again. Claire, send back to that.
Thanks, Chair. There's nothing I want to add to the report.
Thank you, Chair. Okay. I think it's appropriate that I just make a comment on behalf of the Bishop of Galloway, who has been very involved with the process up till now. First of all, what we would like to say is to express gratitude to the education officers for the spirit in which this consultation has taken place. There has been a real sense of genuine concern for the pupils of St. Peter's and for the tradition of the school, and so acknowledge that has taken place in a sense of gratitude for the process. Also like to say that the genuine concern for the individual pupils has come across, and we'd like that to continue and to be part of our process, which is there. I think it's also appropriate at this time to acknowledge the contribution of St. Peter's over the many decades, to recognise that it's made a contribution to the community of St. Peter's, and to acknowledge those who have made a contribution to the school, those parents and those staff, and that has been significant. Also like just to express the gratitude of the church to them as well as to the council. I think it's also important to recognise that in recent times there has been a dramatic decline in the number of pupils at the school, and that it's realistic to recognise that the council must come to some sort of decision this morning. It's a sense of sadness that a school may well be lost with the decision which the councillors make, but we have to recognise that we do live in a realistic situation, and the church acknowledges where you are just now, and we thank you for the support which you've given and for the ongoing support which you're offering to Catholic education in Dumfries and Galloway.
Thank you, William. I think that's much appreciated, and on behalf of the committee, can I say that's reciprocated as well in terms of the assistance you and the Catholic Church in general has given this process. Davy?
Just on following what Father McFadden said, I've just personally thank him for the support he's shown us in the last 3 years, because we have been at certain meetings at the school where it has got quite sensitive, and lately it's been quite delicate, but I know a decision's got to be made, and it's very sad because I can mind St. Peter's when it had a school roll of 70, plus a lot of my friends have went there, but I think if we came to the day, I think common sense has got to prevail.
Thank you, David. So can we move to the recommendation? Sorry, Rob.
Thank you, Chairman. I will be brief. I think Father McFadden's expressed the situation with the grace that everyone that knows him would expect, and I very much appreciate his comments. I think in common with Davy, large numbers of my family and friends over the years will have attended that school. There is no two ways about it. Were we not in this situation, there would be no interest, certainly on my part, in doing what I think we require to do today. It is sad, it is unfortunate. I think, like Davy, we'd much rather we were not in this situation, but we must be realistic. The numbers are now what they are, and I think there is very little prospect of future demand.
Thanks, Rob. So can we move to the
Sorry, just before you go to the decision, just to say that once you've considered and made a decision, I just want to highlight the process, because that doesn't automatically affect the closure aspect. If you do go to agree the recommendations today, we do have to notify the Scottish Government. They will consider our process and what we've been doing. And just to say, we have been in close contact with them throughout this process and throughout and with Education Scotland, but we can never be complacent about these matters. They have to look and consider our process before we can get final confirmation that they are supporting the closure and the way we approached it. If they didn't, there'd be other processes to put in place which would elect the committee to. But just to say, closure doesn't take into effect today from this decision. There is further processes to get put in place.
Thanks, Claire. Okay, so if we move to the recommendations, can we note 2.1? And can we agree 2.2 and 2.3? Thank you. So moving on to item 15, Dumfries Learning Town Learning Hub Community Company. And that's on page 235. And Claire, you're speaking to this? Is there anything you want to add to the report?
Thanks, Chair. If I just to briefly to remind committee that the Learning Hub is a key part of Dumfries Learning Town programme. We're all very excited about this in terms of the collaborative working that it's producing and the product that we have seen at recent committees. A key part of that is about creating a different vehicle that's not under the school model. And the paper that you see today is detailing a process and a vehicle in order to deliver that. And it is reflecting the true aims and aspirations of what this council wants to achieve. We presented this paper last at the September committee, and you quite rightly asked for further detailed information. What we'd like to see, and hopefully you can see in this paper today, is the next step forward in giving you and responding to the details and queries that you had at that committee. But very happy to take any questions you may have.
Thanks, Claire. Members? Jim?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm actually fully in support of what is actually going to take place in the Learning Hub. I'm going to hang my hat in a sugary nail here as regarding the actual paper, but I think there is actually a chance that we could actually replicate it throughout the region and the other 3 regions if we actually involved the further education, specifically Dumfries and Galloway College and other vocational partners. And if you're happy when we go to recommendations, I've got a third recommendation that would actually give members permission to education officers to actually go to the colleges and vocational to look at trying to bring similar provision as what's going to be in Dumfries through the hub or the bridge to other areas, specifically in my case, Wigtonshire.
Well, I've got no problem with a paper coming to a future meeting of the Education Committee dealing with that, what we can do in terms of replicating this, but I think this is specifically to agree the Learning Hub Community Company. Ronnie, you want to come in?
No, that's exactly what I was going to say, because it is obviously important to have that kind of discussion, but not in this paper. I think if a paper comes to a future committee regarding aspects of that.
So if we can move to the recommendations. 2.1, we've considered the proposals for governance and operational arrangements. And can we remit in 2.2 to Claire as a strategic lead of physical learning environments to develop the establishment of the community company with charitable status and report back on progress in due course. Yep, Ian?
I'm more than happy with that, but just how will we pick up on that further report? Is that just a matter of process that will come forward? But I think there is wider aspirations and maybe even some moves afoot in regards to that, but quite keen to hear how that might progress in regards of a further report.
I think already in terms of the concept, even if not the physical aspiration, in terms of the concept, for example, we've got Network East, which is the 4 secondary schools in the eastern region who are working really closely together to almost replicate the whole idea of Dumfries Learning Town. A lot of that's to do with travelling and looking at spaces that they've got. And we do want to make sure that Dumfries Learning Town concept is rolled out across the rest of the region. So fully in favour of that. What we couldn't say at the moment is whether that would be resource driven or whether it would be a facility or whether it's conceptual. but we would certainly bring back further reports as that develops.
Members, if we can move to item 16, which is on page 239, the Dumfries Learning Town Stage 1 reports. Claire, anything you want to add?
Nothing further to add, except we do have the draft minute from the Policy and Resource Committee, if this committee would find that helpful at all.
Members? Okay. Oh, sorry. Oh, Rob?
Thanks, Chairman. I'm never sure if I'm catching your eye or not. Sometimes I seem to be doing it, perhaps telepathically. Well, firstly, what have we been asked to do here? And secondly, Councillor Gilroy made a very sensible point in the Policy and Resources Committee last week, which is effectively how do we keep an eye on how this is going? Because I don't know about you, but I'm not sure that we've got to the end of the cost increases yet. So I think we need to be clear as a committee, given we're being asked to make a final decision, that we've had an argument at Policy and Resources. I don't intend to rehearse it. It's been misrepresented in some areas, but we'll let that stick to the wall. The key point now, I think, is how this committee discharges its function to monitor what's actually going on. So I think just before we go to the recommendations, I'd like to know how we're going to do that and what the arrangements for that will be.
Thanks, Chair. I'll pick up in the first point and maybe ask Claire to pick up in the second point about monitoring, because they're both good points. 2.3 relates to the fact that Education Committee previously had nominated and agreed an educational model for Dumfries, but that was always going to be subject to Policy and Resources being able to support financially. So the recommendations here refer to that, where what we're saying is, are we agreed finally then that we are able to take that model forward as had been agreed previously, given that Policy and Resources have supported the finances behind it. So really it's just a confirmation of the previous agreement in Education Committee that this is the model that we want to see for education in Dumfries. As far as the monitoring of cost ongoing, I'll pass over to Claire.
As committee members would expect, we have extensive monitoring and using our internal team, but we've also got external cost advisors who are representing our interests and challenging value for money. In terms of the increased governance structure, as you would expect for a programme of this importance, we do have a project board which is chaired by our director, and we have an executive board which is chaired by the chief executive, which has members of governance, finance and teams across the council. So we have very extensive government monitoring arrangements. That doesn't exclude the fact that we will bring irregular updates to this committee, as you would imagine, because there's the physical advancement of Dumfries Learning Town, but there's also the operational advancement, and there's a lot of key and exciting items that we will want to report to you during the next 3 years while we're busy with the construction aspect.
Thank you. Very briefly, yes, I remember supporting the original concept of the Learning Town while other members were busily kicking it to death. I continue to support it. My concern is that we don't run out of money, to put it in a daft laddie way. That is exactly my concern, because it's crucial that we actually deliver the whole thing. So very basically, the question is, how regular will the updates be so that we know that, with any luck, everything is going exactly according to plan and we have nothing at all to be worried about? That would be fantastic. But in case it is not, that we have the earliest heads up on it and we're able to do whatever we need to do.
Claire?
I would suggest in relation to that probably 6 months, because we need to have sufficient time to have done a meaningful progress to give you a meaningful update. And obviously we want to commit our resources to where their bell plays. So I would suggest 6 monthly, but I wouldn't exclude the need for any exceptions. If anything changed in terms of government or any programme aspect, we would do it by exception as well.
Ian?
Just so we're sure as well, we're only committing to phase 1 at this moment in time. I think that was made quite clear, and it's clear within the report. So, no, happy to go forward with my previous proposals as of last week.
Okay, members, if we can go to the recommendation. Sorry, who?
Just one thing, yes, we are committing to phase 1 in here, but I think it's the public should know that we are still committed to phase 2 as well. It's together, it's not a one-off thing, this. as a whole learning town aspect, as a whole region-wide aspect, as Councillor McClung has then, brought something in, it's something that we want to achieve. It's not this and then that's it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we are working in parallel, even if we are a wee bit out of phase with the two stages. Okay, so if we can move to the...
The only bit I'm a wee bit worried about, Jeff, taking this forward, and I appreciate Claire's concerns about bringing things back to committee, and we don't want to take up officer time doing nothing else but report to committee. That was exactly why we moved to 2 monthly committee meetings. But given the volatility of the building sector, is 6 months realistic? When it comes to cost increase, or should we be maybe summon an interim update? Now, even if that interim update was to say, things are going as planned, that's fair enough. But there should be something, I would suggest.
Claire?
So what I probably should detail is that the project board, we have to report to them monthly, and the executive board, we report every second month. And we report actual progress and any exceptions with that. I think, as I've said, in order to make meaningful progress, to say that we have done this and we've reported on tasks during that period, 6 months is actually not a long period of time in terms of taking the project forward. And what I would probably also suggest as well, we'll work in stages. So we're at stage 1 at the moment. Stage 2 will take us a good 6 months to get through that. And we want something tangible that has a line in the sand that we can say, right, that's where the design is, that's where the cost, that's where the programme is. And what we need, in order to do that, we need to get the results of surveys, or we need to get the drawing packages finished, or we need to get the market testing done. And that takes a period of time. If you try and report during that time, we wouldn't have anything tangible to report to you on.
Perhaps we could go to 6 months in the first instance and then review it thereafter. Okay? Yep. Okay, so if we go to recommendations, can we note 2.1, 2.2, and we know what the feedback is from the Policy and Resources Committee? Yep. Okay. As I said at the start, I do have an urgent item, and that's on the out-of-catchment pupil transport for Kirkcudbright Academy. So that's the additional paper that was distributed. What I would suggest is we take a 10-minute break. Lunch? Have we got lunch?
We're all looking at me there.
Okay, we can take lunch if everybody's happy with that, and the Vice Chair was going to arrange lunch.
Believe that, believe anything. Believe that, you believe anything.
Right, if there is lunch, then we'll reconvene at 1 o'clock. If there isn't lunch, then 10 minutes. Okay? The urgent item, which is out-of-catchment pupil transport Kirkcudbright Academy. You'll all have been receiving emails about this, I should think. So, Neil, this is your paper. Is there anything you want to add to it?
Yeah, just briefly by way of introduction, the paper's been written in conjunction with colleagues from Integrated Transport and Commissioning, because as I outlined earlier, we set the policy, they provide the solutions to administer that. The issue clearly is one, it's the operation of a commercial provider that was providing a commercial service to people who are out with catchment. There has been a significant level of correspondence over this, of which you'll be aware, from 16 parents. One of the issues was that the correspondence was going to a number of different parties. So what I've done is I've marshalled that correspondence and we aim to respond to the 16 people who have written in once we've reached the conclusion of this. The three options as outlined in the paper are, as outlined, we do nothing, we provide at a charge, or we provide and don't charge for 29 pupils. That is all of S5 and S6 and 2 pupils in S4, not for the full 56, and it's time limited. To conclude, as I outlined, this is a matter that's unique and it's clearly out with school policy.
Gail?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the sort of urgent report. I know it was raised last week at Policy and Resources and that is obviously causing concern to some families. It was just a couple of questions. The current S4, the two S4s, the S5s and the S6s, would they have been paying for transport anyway? They were, and if so, at what rate per day Was that set as with the previous provider before that ceased?
I believe the rate was £3 per day with a commercial provider. I think I'm right in saying that. That's what I believe it was.
I mean, if that's the case, the options we've got in front of us, I mean, option one isn't an option, I don't think, and certainly taking into consideration the kids' exam diets and the stress of that and the family stress, I think we do need to step in between now and next May. But option two is £5 per day, option three is nothing. Could we have an option four where it's matched with what they've already been paying, so that the council isn't losing out too much, and they would be continuing to pay for what they've already been paying for? Because I think to suddenly give them it for nothing is not necessarily our obligation, but to put it £2 per day higher than they were previously being charged might be a bit excessive. So it's just other members will obviously have their say as well.
Stagecoach were engaged with the parents as part of this. Infrastructure Commission colleagues have engaged Stagecoach with them, and they were quoting, I think, in the region of £8 per day as a commercial solution to this. I'm guided by the £5 a day figure that's been provided by colleagues in Infrastructure and Commissioning. That's their gift to price how we do buses and such like. Option three there is referred to back in the report, that we may take the choice that we don't charge on the basis that we provide grace and favour across the rest of Dumfries and Galloway and don't charge for that. I'm just thinking there's a policy nuance in there. I think that but I suppose what we're doing is we're making a decision on this that's clearly out with policy and not setting any precedent anyway.
Absolutely, and as you say, it is a policy nuance, but grace and favour tends to be provided on the basis that there's space on a mode of transport already doing a route, and that's why it's free. We're actually going to have to set up something completely different for this. So to me, it isn't grace and favour. As you say, it's just truly an exception to policy to cover a sort of short-term gap. One other question: what do the S1s test? 4s? What's their option now as well? I mean, I know that that's not part of this, but just out of interest, how are they going to manage their transport anyway?
We've proposed providing transport for S5 and S6 on the basis that they are coming up to examinations and there's a distinct timetable they've got. The position for S1s to S4s who are undertaking broad general education is for their parents to look now at what alternative arrangements they can put in place to get them to Kirkcudbright.
Rob?
Thanks, Chairman. A question and potentially a comment. Questions in paragraph 3.3, where it talks about the UART offers a subject choice in terms of range and level commensurate with that of Kirkcudbright Academy. I seem to be being hell of a pedantic today, and I'm sorry about that. I'm just wondering what commensurate actually means. I mean, do we in fact have kids who are going to Kirkcudbright because they can't get a course at Douglas UART? I mean, that's a bit of clarification I would like. The reason I asked that is because that was actually suggested to me that it was one of the reasons that choices had been made in the past. I mean, I just leave that where it is and have no comment to make on that decision. The other point that I wanted to make, which I think is, I'm not quite sure if it is a question or not, but I mean, in agreeing a regrettable school closure just now, we were pretty clear that we would take that effect from the end of a school year. So I'm slightly concerned about, notwithstanding the fact that we don't have any statutory responsibility, that effectively we assist some of the pupils currently in this situation and we leave others, or we elect not to assist others who are in the same situation and who would, I think, de facto have to find something else to do, somewhere else to go potentially, in the middle of a school year. You know, it strikes me that we're potentially a little more careful with kids where schools are going to close, and perhaps a little less so with the S1s to S3s here. And I just wonder, I mean, while I absolutely accept that we don't in fact have to do anything at all here, I just wonder if it isn't perhaps fairer, given it is an exception to policy anyway, if we simply provide it for the 56 until the end of the financial year, sorry, the end of the school year, by which time hopefully they'll have a chance to weigh up their options and decide what they all want to do next. It's a comment, and I'll just throw it out there to see really what other people feel about it.
I'm happy to provide something on that. The reason for the word commensurate in 3.3 is that the timetables within the schools aren't exactly the same. The subject choices aren't exactly the same, because schools work with, you know, their local community, their local pupil body to make subject choices available as is appropriate. What we did early on with this was we looked at the profile of the pupils involved and asked Douglas Ure if they could actually accommodate that full range of subject choices, and they said that with some support they could, in terms of numbers and in terms of subject choices. The reason for offering to support those in S5 and S6 is that those are pupils who are working specifically towards external SQA examinations, where S1 to S3 are in broad general education. So it would be less disruptive, if you like, for the earlier years. In terms of providing transport provision for the full 56, we have capacity within the council through a 29-seater bus, I understand, to provide for a limited number of pupils without additional capital outlay. And one of the issues here is that if we're looking at the full 56, we're talking about another bus, we're potentially talking about an additional £50,000 spend on that. So that's, you know, that's part of the rationale for this.
Ted?
Thank you, Chair. I think most of the stuff I was going to ask has been covered by the officers, but I would just stress that what we're actually dealing with here is making sure that pupils who are in an exam cycle aren't disadvantaged. Clearly, parents have a responsibility in this as well. They made a choice to have their children educated at a school outside the catchment area. I think it's important that we get full cost recovery on this. My understanding was that the commercial operator before was in fact charging £4 per head and wasn't able to make it pay. And again, we've had from the officer the fact that the Stagecoach are coming out with a commercial rate of £8. So I think we're actually going a good way towards meeting the aspirations of the parents.
Jim Dempster.
Aye, thanks, Chair. I mean, I was just talking to Gillian at the break there about a local issue. It's the same thing, it's about parental choice. I think that's what we've got to remember in this. This is parental choice. It's the choice the parents made to do this. And therefore, the responsibility shouldn't fall to us to pick up the pieces when it goes wrong. Now, accept fine what the officer's saying, and accept that recommendations are sound and reasonable, but we've also got to watch, because every other parent will be looking at this decision saying, what about me? I've got parents whose kids are left hanging on the street for an hour to get the next service bus, because that's the only means they can get getting their kids home in the dark, in winter, in adverse weather, because they've chosen to send these kids to a school of their choice. So we have to be reasonable and compassionate, but bear in mind it's their problem. And I'd be interested to know what extensive discussions I've had with other providers, because Stagecoach is only in, and other operators may well be sympathetic or be more anxious to secure a contract at a time when their bus is no in service doing something else. But I accept what's being said, but at the end of the day, the responsibility should and does absolutely lie with the parents that made that choice in the first place.
As I said, this paper was written jointly with Harry Thompson, a senior colleague in Transport and Infrastructure, and I'm aware that Harry's been engaging directly with the parents as well in respect of this, and I think has tried to engage them with a range of different providers The issue is that I don't think there's an appetite here from commercial transport providers to do this, and Stagecoach are the only one who have engaged and come back with the cost of £8. I take entirely your point about setting precedent in this, and I'm extremely conscious that this is ex-policy, because, considering this early on, I thought there was just no way that I could find to write this into policy, if you like, without setting huge precedent or if you like, opening huge cans of worms. So this is clearly ex-policy, with the expectation that we're setting a very limited precedent for those that are in a senior phase and are facing external examinations for a limited time. We're not proposing that the transport provision would run past May next year, so those that are currently in S5 and who may go into S6 and Kirkcudbright, they would be on their own then.
And just come back briefly, I'm sure members will be aware anyway, because it's a thing I tried to unravel without any success. Grace and favour pupils, especially in small rural roads with no bus stops, no shelter. We ignored that because it was cheaper to run a smaller bus to the capacity that's required to accommodate our requirement, rather than the hope for grace and favour. So we've been very stringent so far, and we need to be mindful of that. And I'm just rehearsing what I said earlier. I accept what the officer's saying. It's absolutely sound, good judgment. But there is a cautionary note there that we can't go beyond what's reasonable, because then we have to be reasonable for everybody else.
I'm sure we fully accept that. It is very much an exception to policy. Jim McClung?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was actually helpful to hear the rationale behind why the 29 and not the 56, although the rationale appears to me to be it's because we've got a bus that'll fit 29, we haven't got one that'll fit 56. I'm more in line with Councillor Davison. If we're going to do it for some, we do it for all, and it's on a full cost recovery basis until the end of the financial year. And I mean, it's for all 56. I don't think we should be actually splitting the 29 from the others. We either treat them all the same way. We either don't do it or we do it for all.
We've been told
Chair, just on that point, I mean, when we're talking about full cost recovery, what I was hearing from the officers was the full cost recovery would be buying another bus at £50,000, as well as the cost recovery of running that bus, which I take it would be more than £5, which would probably come up to Stagecoach's £7 or £8 a journey. So, I don't think that's a viable option.
Can I just add to that point? I mean, the rationale for doing this as well is not purely on the fact that there's a 29-seater bus going about. The rationale is on when you do the numbers on this, when you combine those that are in S5 and S6 together with two pupils from S4 who are unable to access a specific qualification at Douglas Ewart High School, that gives us a total of 29. That's the rational basis in terms of numbers. All other S4 pupils could make the transfer to Douglas Ewart High School and be catered to. There are two exceptions to that with a practical course. So that's the basis of the numbers.
Yeah, I can understand what the leader's saying, but at the end of the day, we're actually providing this service at the minute for the 56.
It's a commercial, or was a commercial service. Ian?
I suppose that was the point being clarified. I don't think we are providing it free of charge for them all, but just if we could get that re-clarified. I would prefer to see some actual financial figures within the report. I'd like to know exactly how much it was costing as per the obviously option 1 there's no cost, but option 2 and option 3 is no cost. Well, just what the cost either way, what that would have been. Have we got any figures in regards to that? What is the actual monetary cost to this in option 2 and 3?
I'm not able to provide, I can't answer on the actual costs of this service provision. That's something that, again, would lie with colleagues in infrastructure and commissioning.
Could I just come back in regards, I missed the 50k bit earlier. I thought that was, but then Ronnie's making out that it's something to do with purchase of a bus, 50k. I missed that. What was that 50k alluded to earlier?
Half the folk we don't hear, Chairman. There is.
Okay, Neil.
Sorry, to clarify on that point, I did say that if we were to provide for the full 56, that would require a capital expenditure with a bus purchased in the region of £50,000. That's what I was advised during the ongoing discussions I had with Harry Thompson in formulating this paper. Where I'm not able to answer is the specific rationale for his costing of £5 per day per pupil on a full cost recovery basis. I don't know how he does his sums for, cost recovery of a bus.
Okay, Jim McComb.
Thanks, Chair. I'm quite sure the parents accept the principle that they should pay for transport. They have decided of their own volition to move their children out with the catchment of the school they live in. And, the principle of payment, I'm quite sure the parents do accept. They made a private arrangement with a bus contractor to charter a bus, and that operated successfully up until about a fortnight ago. So they are prepared to pay. What I would like to know is, did they have a tiered charge? Because some of the pupils joined the bus at Newton Stewart, some of them joined at Creetown, and some, I believe, at Kersluth. We have a set charge there of £5. Is that for all pupils, irrespective of where they join the bus?
Again, I can't answer in the detail of that. My understanding, given the terms of the paper, it would be £5 per pupil per transport, however long that was. And I don't know what arrangements the commercial provider had in respect of, tiered charges. It would appear that, given that they're no longer operating, that whatever they were doing, it wasn't viable.
Got Andy followed by Ian, then Rob. Andy?
Thanks, Chair. I'll take the opportunity to put two questions in. The second last sentence in 3.1 actually sets out what we're currently doing just now. So that interim transport provision is in place, and it will continue to 27th of November. Right? So we've already got that there. The question I'd like to ask, though, is about the S1, 2, 3 and the 7 pupils in S4. We're going through, as a class here, broad general education. Criteria for excellence requires continuous assessment. How disruptive will it be for those children, for those pupils to move midway through an academic year? I think that, for me, is the crux. Yep.
The broad general education should be much more common across the two schools. It should be much more straightforward to meet the experiences and outcomes of the children during the broad general education. And yes, children move across our schools all the time, and their continuous assessment is an important part of that transition. So we would feel much more confident about those children's transition to another establishment than we would for children who are in the senior phase at this particular point in their journey.
Thank you. Gillian, I accept your rationale there to an extent, but we're talking here less mature pupils being expected to adjust. And are we honestly saying that S5 and X6 pupils are going to sit a different higher or a different exam from the kids down at Newton Stewart? I would suggest no, they're not. It'll be exactly the same exam. So it's either, I would suggest we either do it for them all using the existing provision we've got and fund that the way it is, or we look at something different.
Thank you. And ultimately, that's members' decision. The parents made this decision to send their children to Kirkcudbright Academy, and this private provision has now ceased. And we will do all we can to make a smooth transition for the young people.
Do you want to comment back on that?
Yeah, I'm interested in Andy's proposition and how we would fund that, and then how we would probably fund it for the other 4,500 people that might potentially want the same service. So I'm interested to hear his proposition on that.
Can I come in, Chair? Yeah. As everyone around the table here today has said, this is a very exceptional set of circumstances. This is outside policy, and it is meant for this very, very small number of pupils. This is not a suggestion at all that we change policy across the whole region. Right?
In the back of that.
Chair, it still hasn't answered the how that would be costed, how it would be funded, that. But the other thing, the outside policy bit, as far as I'm picking up from officers, is the two S4, the S5 and the S6. Nothing else, and once we start expanding that into other spheres, then it is not something that we could justify that as being outside policy. That's what I'm picking up.
Ian?
Yeah, we were given information, I think it was Stagecoach, the cost was £8. Was that £8 per day or £8 per journey? And also was that quotation on the S4 to 6, or was it right for all S1 right through to S6?
I wasn't party to those specific discussions. My understanding is it was £8 per pupil per day across all age ranges.
Bob?
Thanks, Chairman. I think maybe something's been lost in translation. I think what both Jim McClung and Andy Ferguson were pointing to was the fact that we're transporting 56 children at the moment as an emergency measure, which, let's be clear, is awful good of us because we don't have to do any of it. We're proposing to transport 29 until the end of the school year. I think what I'm going back to is, and I'm awful sorry if this is a daft laddie question, if we are currently managing to transport 56 as an emergency measure, why wouldn't we transport 56 on the basis that they all pay, as they've been accustomed to paying in any case, until the end of the school year, which is the natural break point for all of them under any circumstances anyway? I'm not clear why we would continue with 29 as opposed to 56, when actually we've stepped into the breach and are currently transporting all 56.
Yeah.
I mean, it was goodwill. It was a goodwill gesture. It was quite a considerable goodwill gesture to provide this transport. I understand from the commissioning team that we are not a commercial operator, and therefore we can provide an existing bus as part of our school transport provision, but we do not have an operating licence to charge as a service bus, as a council. And I understand that that's the position.
Okay. Gail?
That makes it as clear as mud. So how can we charge £5 then? Sorry. I'll let you come back to that point in a moment. I think the crew, are these kids that are currently studying subjects which they can't get at Douglas Ewart already registered to sit exams and such like at Kukubri?
They will be.
They will be.
They
yes.
will be. All of the pupils will be registered. But again, pupils are deregistered throughout the year and
Yes.
they're added in. So I mean, it's fairly common practice that the roles will shift and who is being presented and who is not will shift throughout the year. In terms of the charging, it's a very good point, and I understand it is because it is our provision and that we do have within the law the option to charge for grace and favour. We do not have the option to produce a commercial service, and I think that's the distinction.
On that basis, I mean, I think the priority here is to ensure the continuation of those who lack the subject choices at Douglas Ewart, which is the 29 S4, 5 and 6 pupils. And I would quite happily move option 2 and ensure that we recover £5 per day. And I'm afraid that the S1s to 4s, the basis behind that is that these parents might not have chosen to send their kids to Kukubri to do those extra subjects had that bus not existed in the first place. But now they're down that exam route, they're at a point now where I know they're highly stressed. I've got 3 kids that have just left school, I know what it's like. They're the priority at the moment. Those in S1 to 4 can choose not to go to Kukubri anymore, and they will survive that. There's no question with all the things that we have in place to do that. So I would be quite happy to move option 2.
Jim?
I'll second that, Chair. And there is something else. If we are now picking up 29 pupils, the other, 27, might be able to engage with Newton Stewart Community Transport where they don't have the capacity to take 56, but they might have the capacity to take a lower number, and that's something they could do privately. There's no suggestion that we make that an offer. I'm just saying it allows the remainder the opportunity to explore other avenues that they couldn't explore as a group of 56. But I think that's a fair and reasonable approach to a very challenging and difficult situation.
Okay, Jim, you want to come back?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The option 2 that's being proposed is not for hire reward. We don't need a PCV operator's licence. It's been done on a full cost recovery basis. Therefore, there is no difference whether we transport 29 or 56. As long as it's in a cost recovery basis, we can either transport 29 on cost recovery, or we can transport 56 on cost recovery. There is no difference in the for-profit or hire or reward regarding a PCV licence. It's for hire or reward. We're doing it on cost recovery.
Bring Ted in on that then. Move to you, Neil.
Just, I think it has been explained already by the officer. Although they were providing on an interim basis just now transport for 56 pupils, we're doing it at the cost of not having a spare bus. To actually transport 56 pupils would require buying another bus at a capital cost of £50,000. That would be unreasonable in my view.
Neil, I'll bring you in now.
I just wanted to add to this that I've been guided on the rationale behind these options that you have by colleagues in transport and infrastructure. I'm not an expert on licensing and buses and so on. The point that I wanted to make, and it eluded me earlier, was that the issue for running the bus with 56 purely for these pupils is that none of them are eligible. Now, we can have an option in terms of licensing that we would commingle pupils, and that you then do so, you can then charge on a cost recovery basis. What the licence doesn't allow for, I believe, is to run a dedicated service only for pupils that are non-entitled. That's the rationale for behind the 29 and not the 56.
Ian?
I don't like making uninformed decisions. Going back to the question I asked earlier in regards to the financial implications in and around about this. I mean, I think Jim and his colleagues are making a valid point in trying to gain an understanding, certainly, to the facts behind the decision we'll potentially make. Because when you look at this report, read it just off the cuff, I would certainly lean towards option 2, is what Councillor McGregor's already put forward. But there's still an argument there, is that, I mean, it comes back for the 50k to buy a bus. You wouldn't buy a bus to use for 6 months. You'd lease it or rent it. You wouldn't do that. So that level of information is not contained within the report. That could go from 50k down to 10k. So what are the actual cost implications in real terms when it comes to what we're providing at the moment compared to charging that £5 for the 29? I mean, I'm just the point I'm abstaining.
Well, we've got a motion from Gail, seconded by Jim, that we adopt option 2. Is there any amendments? Nope. Okay. Okay, that seems to be unanimous, so option 2 it is. Okay. I've got no further business, thank you.